Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Jodie Brunning from the Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility, New Zealand Charitable Trust, and I'm here today talking with Dr. Charles Merfield, otherwise known as Merf. Merf has a background in organic horticulture. His master's was in applied science, looking at biocontrol and general ecology of horticultural management, and then his PhD looked at carrot seed production in the organic sector. Thank you for joining us today, Merf. And I listened to you talk about agroecology and how organics fits within the agroecological field. And also you've done a lot of work looking at regenerative agriculture. You've gone down that sort of applied, so it's not applied regenerative angle. So I'm really grateful that you've crossed all these areas, because you know, for conventional farmers trying to work out how to use less chemicals and how to ensure that they've got optimum nutrition it's a pretty difficult balance. And so I'd just love to hear you talk about that today and your observations on the work by the Stockholm Resilience Centre, the planetary boundaries sort of framework, and Jacqueline, oh sorry, slip of the tongue, Kate Raworth's work on donut economics, which is really good. So thank you for joining us today.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Jodie, for the invitation, the opportunity to talk to today. Right, let's get this presentation up. So this is my view on regenerative agriculture and how that's fitting in across the whole of the agroecologies. Just get a bit of action here. So first up, the global context for ag and horticulture to me is absolutely everything today. And first up, you can't go past 9 planetary boundaries. This was developed some 15 years ago at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. And they said, right, what are the kind of key operating parameters of the planet, you know, like the temperature in a car engine? And so they identified 9 of these that you can see here. Some of these you'll recognize. Climate change, biosphere integrity used to be simply called biodiversity loss. Land system change is where you take natural ecosystems and turn them into farmland, and farmland into cities, urban spaces. Freshwater use, too much use of fresh water. Biochemical flows, too much phosphorus and nitrogen in the environment. And then carrying around to novel entities. These are all the synthetic chemicals, such as pesticides and plastics we're putting into the environment. They identified these boundaries and they said, how well are we doing? A simple traffic light system. And as you can see, there are 3 in the red zone, which is more, and climate change, which gets all the headlines, is only in the yellow. Biosphere integrity, too much phosphorus and nitrogen in the environment and too much synthetic chemistry is a far bigger risk than just climate change. And I really like the subtitle for the 9 planetary boundaries, a safe operating space for humanity. We need to be really clear here around this kind of, people talk about saving the planet. I can assure you the planet does not need saving, especially in terms of the ball of rock hurtling around the sun. When people talk about saving the planet, they talk about saving the biosphere. We are in the 6th great extinction event globally, which means there's been 5 great extinction events before, which were not caused by humanity. So the biosphere will rebound back very happily within just a few million years of the great extinction event. What it won't rebound with is us, i.e. humans. So all this stuff is fundamentally about saving ourselves. So all this red and yellow you see here, these are all direct threats to humanity's, civilizations, our economic and political systems' existence. And this is what donut economics is also based on. Having an economic system that's rational in terms of the biophysical limits of the planet. Because if we break these things, our economic systems and our political and our social systems will collapse. So we need to reduce our impact on the biosphere, not for some highly altruistic things, which are good in and of themselves, but entirely for self-preservation. Another key way of looking at farming and growing is through the concept of ecosystem services, which goes back at least half a century. It was some 20 years ago, Bob Constanza tried to actually put a value on these. And as one of his reviewers said, a bold attempt to put a value on infinity. So ecosystem services are the services produced by ecosystems. The key things here is farms are ecosystems. Therefore, farms produce ecosystem services. Food is only one of 25 ecosystem services. So when people talk about we need to maximize yield, my question always is, the yield of which ecosystem service are we talking about here? Food's only one of them. And I'd suggest that many of the problems we face is because we have overemphasized the yield of food, and we've underemphasized the yield of other things such as pollination, fresh water, climate regulation, biodiversity. So to me, it's really important we start actually thinking much more broadly in terms of what we produce from farming and growing systems. And then even stepping up a level, when we focus on just food, what we produce is very efficient farming systems, but they're really brittle farming systems, just like the just-in-time produce delivery system. These things work really well in a stable environment, and I mean environment in the broad terms here, so political, social, economic environments as well. If they're stable, brittle systems function really efficiently. But as the environments become increasingly unstable, brittle systems break when they are hit by external permutations, whether it's economic, social, climatic, whatsoever. So we actually need to pull our production of things like food in and reduce yield to make our systems more robust and resilient, and therefore be able to handle these external shocks. The Millennium Development Goals. Here in New Zealand, we produce food for some 45 million people. There are 5 million odd New Zealanders. There are New Zealanders that are hungry, that are even starving. They are clearly not starving due to a lack of yield. Contrary to the main drive of intensive agriculture, of increasing yield to feed people, it's very clear that yield does not feed people. What feeds people is politics and economics. If yield fed people, everybody in New Zealand would be fed 5 times over. The fact that we have starving people indicates it is not yield that puts food in people's stomachs. So coming into Aotearoa, New Zealand. To me, New Zealand farming really needs to get out of the business of yield, selling commodities, because we simply cannot compete with the rest of the world in this. New Zealand's in the business essentially not just selling food, but food stories to rich people. These are people that have actually, to be really blunt, already eaten too much food. So to me, that's the kind of context, these high value stories. So what is regenerative agriculture, particularly focusing in here on New Zealand? I think regen isn't actually a thing in and of itself. I think it's a symptom of what we're seeing as an increasingly rapid change in agriculture and horticulture across New Zealand. There was a really interesting chart that came out in a paper a couple of years ago now from some academics from the Netherlands. And they did a search. There's this thing called Google Ngrams, which will allow you to search through virtually all the published literature, not just scientific literature, but books, magazines, newspapers, everything basically, and look for particular words. And so they produced this rather interesting chart here. The solid lines are regenerative agriculture, mentions of regenerative agriculture, and then we have other lines for organics and sustainable and agroecology. But this chart's actually really, really confusing. It makes it look like there's a lot of talk about regenerative, but if your maths is pretty reasonable, you'll notice there's 2 orders of magnitude difference in the scales for on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and the right-hand side is for regenerative agriculture. So let's just pick this chart apart. So what I went back to Google Ngrams, to the source data, and unhelpfully on the previous chart as well is they'd had separate lines for organic farming and organic agriculture and regenerative farming. So basically I crammed those down into the 4 terms: sustainable, organics, agroecology and regenerative, and plotted them all on the same axis. What you can see now is the term sustainable farming agriculture and organic farming agriculture now clearly dominates the data. You can hardly differentiate regenerative from the bottom line, the bottom axis. So we'll get rid of sustainable and organic, and now we'll just show agroecology and regenerative. Agroecology now clearly dominates regenerative. Now, agroecology is a reasonably technical term. It tends to be mostly used in academia and those within the sustainable agricultures. And as you can see, around 2012, it's kind of up to then, it's kind of been bumping along for the last couple of decades. That's really taken off. Sustainable agriculture is still kind of well down the bottom there. It's not until we chart regenerative agriculture data by itself and take off some of the smoothing, you actually see those original double humps that was in the Dutch researchers' chart. It's tiny. The amount of actual media coverage by regen is really small. There's two things going on here as well. This peak in the 80s is from Rodale Research Center, Organic Research Center in the States, the United States. Rodale had been heavily promoting the concept of organic regenerative. This sudden upswing in the line you can see in 2018 is modern regenerative, but that's completely different from what Rodale was talking about. Rodale's regenerative is an extension to certified organic horticulture. The peak on the right, the regenerative, is not. Indeed, most modern regenerative farmers would not be able to get organic certification due to their use of synthetic pesticides and soluble nitrogen fertilizers. So these are actually two quite different things. So looking at regenerative in New Zealand and what's been happening here, effectively, it's been a wagon with the same bunch of farmers and growers in it that have been going through several rebranding exercises, so to speak. Excuse me a second. So in the early 2000s, there was carbon farming, which was basically the time that the initial talk around carbon credits was coming in. So farmers were starting to go, can we get rich by increasing our soil organic carbon and therefore getting paid for that? Around 2005, they rebranded into biological farming, which got some really quite significant traction. A legal association was set up. Ever increasing numbers of farmers started joining. Then somewhere around 2017, they rebranded again. Same farmers doing pretty much similar kinds of things, rebranded. And to me, a couple of things were occurring here. One, regenerative is a really good brand. It's kind of very self-explanatory about what you're up to. Biological and carbon farming are kind of need a bit more explanation about what's going on. And I think regenerative agriculture rebranding also occurred at exactly the point in time this tipping point in agriculture was really starting to take off. So my question is whether the regen brand hangs around or whether it disappears and is replaced by something else. Now, this is a bit of a busy slide, but the key message here is if you go back to pre-scientific revolution and pre the industrial revolution, there is basically one form of farming system in what's now the developing world. I'm going to leave aside here indigenous agricultures. So basically everybody is still forming in what is now the developed world as their indigenous type of agricultures. But we see around 1800s the divergence of the different forms of agriculture we have today. What I call industrial agriculture. So this is agriculture that starts drawing on some of the techniques and ideas of the Industrial Revolution. Liebig's discovery that plants take up minerals not as the organic form, they take them up as the inorganic form. And industrial farming around the 1950s morphs into intensive agriculture. This is associated with the intensification of agriculture, the Green Revolution, and the massive increases in yields associated with that, the introduction of widespread use of the soluble fertilizers, and definitely the introductions of the pesticides, which occurred in the 1950s, starting in the mid-1940s. Organic agriculture split off from mainstream around the 1920s and 1930s, when both systems were actually not that different. You know, we're pre-pesticides, we're pre-widespread use of soluble fertilizers. So organics had split off much earlier than that. The key message I'm trying to make in this chart, however, is since around the 1990s, if not earlier, organics has been on a pretty linear path. It hasn't changed much. If you look at standards, there's been no major revision of standards or changes since the 1990s, late 1990s, when GMOs, GE was banned. But in the meantime, since somewhere around in the 1980s, intensive agriculture has increasingly started reforming and de-intensifying as the multiple negative implications of intensive agriculture start to be realized. And this is the 9 planetary boundaries. Quite simply, intensive agriculture is eating itself. It's destroying the very ecological and planetary foundations that it is built on. And at some point, they will be so degraded that it cannot persist. And at a local level, this is very clear. Issues like soil salinization and soil destruction at a local level is stopping land being used from agriculture in wide swathes of the world.
Merf, while we're on this, can I just interrupt for a moment while we're on this slide? Because you and I have had many, many discussions regarding what happened in the 1980s. So we looked at, and the 1990s, we looked at New Zealand's separate science institute, the DSIR, being disbanded, and we looked at agricultural extension services basically being defunded, and so now where we see agricultural extension services, they'll be under the rubric of an industry funded sector, which it limits the capacity of those forms of agricultural extension services to look at to take a greater interdisciplinary perspective that might grasp sort of the implications of the longer term, for example. So that timing coincided, and of course agricultural extension services were a fabulous feedback loop. They weren't just supplying the latest, you know, published scientific literature to farmers. It was a feedback loop towards scientists to assist with innovation, and that was sort of decoupled at about that time. Would you care to comment on that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, to me, agricultural science is a 3-legged stool. It requires 3 groups of people: the scientists, farmers, and extension agents, and they have to be inside the tent. It's not scientists going out and telling farmers about the latest innovation. It's about farmers being part of the science system itself, driving the direction of the system, identifying problems that need to be addressed, with the extension agents often acting as an intermediary of communication, because clearly there's an awful lot of farmers, not so many scientists. So the extension agents are very much that 2-way communication channel. And the thing with a 3-legged stool, if one of those legs is missing, you cannot compensate by changing the length of the other 2 legs. It doesn't work. You need all 3 legs to be in balance. And so New Zealand would be one of the more extreme examples of this globally, but certainly through the 70s and into the 80s, particularly with Thatcherism, Reaganism, neoliberalization, we saw the loss or the destruction of extension services globally. And I think we've had, therefore, massive problems in the fact that agricultural science across much of the world is entirely dysfunctional, even broken, because this fundamentally important model of agricultural science has been lost from so many countries.
And that's also mirrored the increasing applied nature of the science enterprise. So they haven't known how to fund basic science, which is, you know, can be complex. It can, and, you know, so an example of basic science in agriculture would be looking at the soil type, at the climate type, looking at temporal changes over years. And this is what farmers have to deal with. They're trying to pay a mortgage based on the fact that maybe 2 years from now there'll be a drought or a flooding event, and how do they have enough slack in the system to get through those events?
And farming is the multidisciplinary activity. You have to be a jack of all trades and a master of several to be a farmer, and agricultural science likewise essentially covers all the scientific disciplines, from information, physics, chemistry, biology, and ecology. Agricultural science is, like most science in most countries, is heavily siloed, and simply the different disciplines are not speaking to each other, so they are not looking at those symbiotic interactions between these different areas that farmers need them to be looking at. So to me, yes, agricultural science is broken on so many different levels, and nothing short of major reform is really required. This takes significant redesign and rebuilding of the science system, not just restructuring, far beyond that.
And what I really like is, for example, the principle of kaitiakitanga, stewardship, and the idea of overarching principles that ensure we have to steward our soil, our water, and our human health for the longer term. And right now, the science enterprise is it's based on sort of notions of what excellence is, and excellence is predominantly a single discipline kind of concept. It's because once you look at interdisciplinary science, you can't pin down what is excellence. And so the funding models really haven't been able to include complex interdisciplinary basic research, such as what the agricultural community desperately needs. And so then we turn around and we have instrumental responses to the complex issues that drive disease or, soil erosion, and we're not able to actually talk to that meaningfully, I would suggest.
Yeah. I mean, I frequently say there's far too much excellent science and not enough important science. Excellent science in that context, meaning essentially the kind of high tech, the whizzy, the novel stuff that gets you a prestigious journal publication. A lot of the important science is incredibly dull, boring, foot soldier kind of science. It's not breathtaking, it's not cutting edge, it's none of those, but it's desperately important for the future of addressing planetary boundaries and ecosystem services and all that big, and achieving our Millennium Development Goals. I'm pretty sure we don't need another Large Hadron Collider to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. What we do need is an awful lot of really boring, basic agronomic science and ecological science to address these challenges. So I think, we still need high-tech basic science, but in agriculture, I think so much of the stuff doesn't need a high-tech solution. We already have agroecological solutions that just need implementing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that brief sojourn.
Excuse me, right. And as an example of this kind of lack of change in organics, the FAO now 15 plus years ago developed SAFA, Sustainability Assessment of Food and Agricultural Systems, which was put together because of the literally thousands of agricultural sustainability assessment frameworks that were out there at the time. Some of them were very high quality, some of them was just straightforward greenwashing. So the FAO gathered some of the world's best experts in this year, and they spent several years developing this definitive ag assessment framework. So a few years ago in New Zealand, 5+ years ago now, there was this project called the New Zealand Sustainability Dashboard Project that was looking at developing computer systems to allow different industry sectors to collect information at the grower level and collate it up to industry level so they can actually monitor how they're doing and how they're improving their sustainability. And as part of this, I compared SAFA with organic standards. And the results were not a good look for organics. So SAFA is divided up into what are called 3 main themes: governance, economics, social, and environmental. Instantly, that kind of tells you the breadth of the thing, because most sustainability standards only cover the environmental. Certainly governments and social and economics are rarely part of those things, and if so, at only a small percent. So I compared organic standards using iPhone standards against SAFA, and it got a grand score of 35%, which in university grades is an E. It's a complete fail. And then I compared SAFA to organic standards, because this was a classic apples and oranges comparison, so I did it both ways. SAFA compared to CORUS, which is the organic system for comparing amongst different organic standards. So it's set up for comparisons amongst standards. SAFA got 75%. 35% for organics, 75% for SAFA. If that doesn't speak volumes that organic standards have become stagnated, have become ossified, versus what is now the definitive and the best agricultural sustainability standard globally, I don't know what does.
And do you think a key part of that is the inability in organic standards, the challenge to prevent sort of erosion and soil you know, soil, like micronutrient mining and that sort of.
To me, the problem with organic standards is they're entirely locked in by the IFOAM system of trying to standardize standards, but also the multiple government to government standards. You know, we've seen in the EU, with the EU trying to reform internally its own organic standards, and the massive fallout and collateral damage that was done by that internal process. You can imagine trying to expand that up to global scale. Basically, organic standards are completely locked in, so they are impossible to change except in the minutiae. So for me, it's kind of the baby and the bathwater both need to be thrown out. We have the concept of organics version 3.0. To me, the only impediment to that making progress is the lack of the current standards, and what is required is an entirely new standard written for organics version 3.0. And basically we leave 2.0 behind, and organics 3.0 as a concept and as a set of standards can then make some progress. Until then, organics is really kind of stuck in its rut. To give us an example of just now where the conventional industries have got, the Lighter Touch project. This is a big project at New Zealand level, $27 million over about 7 years. Atypically for a project such as this in ag and hort, the industry put 3/4 of the money in, the government only 1/4. Normally it's the other way around. That gives an indication of how important this issue is to mainstream ag and hort in New Zealand. This is their vision, and you can see highlighted there in bold in the middle, based on agroecological crop protection practices. So this is all about reducing pesticide use, and their solution is agroecology. Organic agriculture is just a form of agroecology. It's one of the niche forms, as is regenerative agriculture, as is permaculture, as is agroforestry or intercropping. These are all ecological farming techniques. Therefore, they are a form of agroecology. This is mainstream New Zealand farming and growing, wanting to do agroecology of their own volition and paying for 3/4 of the cost of doing so. One tiny sub-project in a Lighter Touch is controlling arthropod insect pests through agroecology, or conservation biocontrol is the specific technique. So this is a typical perennial crop production system from anywhere around the world. You've got rows of crop, underneath it bare earth, principally from herbicides or in organics from cultivation. And then if you're lucky, a piece of pasture, mown grass down the center. And what I've suggested for part of this transformation is to put about 20 species of plants, basically pasture plants mostly, grasses, legumes and forbs, the herbs, everything else, on the vineyard floor to provide what's called SNAP, shelter, nectar, pollen and alternative prey. These are resources for beneficial insects that will boost the numbers of beneficial insects that will then migrate into the crop and control the pests there, the insects there. So
and I think an important point here that a lot of people might not recognize is that a lot of the work in regen ag is being done in pasture, in dryland farming. So what you're talking about here is regenerative agriculture in a horticulture environment, which I think would that be a little bit more novel?
Yes, it kind of is. And again, going back to the fact that regen is a form of agroecology, to me, agroecology is over the top, and regen organics and conservation biocontrol, they're all part of it. So regen has come out of a pasture livestock space. So when you start trying to translate regen into a perennial horticultural crop, it starts becoming kind of messy, because the whole load of the kind of basic principles and stuff around rotational grazing don't apply. So for me, I think it's far more useful to say, okay, we want to do an agroecological conversion of our perennial crop production systems here, rather than we want to do regen horticulture. Because I'm going to go, regen has to involve livestock. That's kind of a guts of the system. So that means you need livestock in your horticultural system. That's all well and good. and people doing regen viticulture and stuff are deliberately integrating livestock into their systems. But to me, it's much easier to do it conceptualize it as agroecology rather than just regen. It's much less messy. And so back to the citrus orchard. So we've got this essentially a full agroecological conservation biocontrol makeover of this. It's a tiny amount of money out of the 27 million in this project, truly small change. But out of all the stuff this Lighter Touch project is doing, this piddling little project has got by far the most visibility and traction of anything being done. And I presented this citrus project to the Apples and Pears conference a couple of years back now. And they were quite astonished that this was being done in a Lighter Touch. Excuse me. And they said, we didn't think they were going to be doing this because Apples and Pears are not in a Lighter Touch, because Apples and Pears have been doing integrated pest management, IPM, since the 1990s. And I slightly cheekily said, neither did they. But Apples and Pears, having seen this kind of concept and this change, they now have an SFFF project specifically looking at this kind of agroecological transformation of apple and pear pit fruit systems for multiple reasons, not just pest control. Weed management, biodiversity, planetary boundaries, ecosystem services. And as I said before, regen organics are just one of version of agroecology, and there are out there what I call a whole load of the alternative agricultures. And you can see there's a fairly large list here. So over the last century and a bit now, 20 years, a whole range of alternative approaches to intensive agriculture, to mainstream farming, have been developing. Some of these have actually come out of mainstream farming. For example, top right, second down, conservation agriculture. This was a response to the Dust Bowls in the United States, transplanting Northern European cultivation systems into the prairies on soils and climates that are completely unsuitable, resulting in destruction of the soil structure and it literally blowing away for thousands of kilometers out to the ocean. Others have come very much out of the alternative space, permaculture, for example. So they're coming at these things have been generated from multiple sources. And I'm just trying to see if I've got no-till up the top. Very, very focused. Just how do you get seeds into the ground without any form of soil disturbance, to whole farm systems, permaculture again being a well-known example of a whole farm system in there. Okay, let's look at some specific stuff around regen and what it is and what it isn't. So regen is very much focused on the outcomes, and I make the contrast with organics at the certification level on farm. Standards basically a list of what you can do and you can't do, what you can use and what you can't use. Regen does completely the opposite. They go essentially, we don't care how you get to the destination, it's the destination of improved soil health, biodiversity, stock health and profit, and social in particular. They say, doesn't matter how you get there as long as you actually achieve those outcomes. Clearly, if you do achieve those outcomes, you're not going to be using a whole load of nasty, harmful techniques to get there. You're going to be forced to use techniques that are positive. The core focus and the fanaticism in regen is around biological soil health. And to me, this, let me just check my next slide. No, okay. To me, this is a really interesting contrast with organic agriculture. Going back to the 1920s and its foundation, the key issue was soil health. Healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people, the organic mantra. This is version 1 of organics that focused on this issue of soil health and a whole range of other issues as well, social and all kinds of other things, until around the 1960s, when organics, off the back of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, morphed into organic agriculture version 2, which is almost entirely focused on banning the novel entities, the synthetic pesticides and chemicals and soluble nitrogen fertilizers. So going back to the regen, that original similarity is there, and organics went off and became something else. Regen to me is almost refilling that niche around the focus of farmers on soil health again. And to do that, it's all about increasing plant biodiversity, these highly diverse mixtures. The interesting thing here is the soil science has undergone a paradigm, a revolution in its understanding of soil organic matter formation, and it is not residues, stuff like compost, that drives soil health. It is plant root exudates and the diversity of plant root exudates. So the regenerative farmers have actually been informed by this science. They are right on the money. If you want to maximize soil health, it is a diversity of living plants, roots, and year round. It is not compost. So organics has quite a lot to reverse out of here. Same for bare soil, organic vegetable production, huge amounts of bare soil, organic viticulture and perennial crops. We've got all these bare undervines and bare under tree. This is all really bad stuff. So part of that is this minimizing tillage. In organics, we're still dependent on cultivation. You know, many organic farmers are reliant on the plow. This is all really bad for soil health. So organics has found itself in the bizarre position of being founded on the issue of soil health, but now having a number of practices that actively work against or are not beneficial for soil health. Some more practices. So this is, again, the very practical farm level stuff. This high density rotational grazing, this kind of takes New Zealand's standard rotational grazing, but to a much higher level of intensity. And this is coming out of holistic grazing and the work of Alan Savory. Some of this would be considered reasonably contentious. But again, as well, looking at these high diversity pastures, if you graze them like ryegrass and white clover, you end up with ryegrass and white clover. They need quite different grazing managements to make these things work. So that's a highlight of how the fact that these is whole farm systems, you need to make multiple changes to make the new system work. If you try and impose part of the old system on the new system, it'll just simply not work. So they're not eliminating soluble nitrogen fertilizers, but they're certainly trying to minimize these, and certainly far away from the kind of luxury use that we've seen in much of New Zealand agriculture. They're very keen on the biological foliar ferts. Some of these have got good science behind them. Some of them haven't. Some of them are straight snake oil. You know, this is life. They're trying to minimize the use of synthetic pesticides. Again, unlike organics, they're not banned, but they're trying to reduce their use. And again, there's continuous improvement. Keep trying to reduce them each year round. And going back to the... Yep.
An example of that is, as you know, I've researched glyphosate, and it's the concept of getting off an addiction. You know, you can go cold turkey, or you can slowly ease yourself off it. And, you know, managing, keeping your soil covered. How do you do that? Do you do that via sprays? Do you do it via tillage or other matters? It's a challenging, and it involves techniques, and it's got to respond to the local climate, the local soil.
And to me, that's another contrast with organics. Organics quickly develop standards to be a barrier to entry, because that allows them to maintain the market premium. But if I had $1 for every time a farmer had come up to me and said, I'd love to be organic, but I really don't like that certification, I'd be a rich man. So the advantage there of this approach of a non-barrier to entry is farmers can get into the system easily and gain the acceptance and the support and the help and the information, but they are expected to improve year on year on year on year. So if you reduce your glyphosate use this year, you have to reduce it further next year. That's in contrast for organics, is once you're over the bar, once you're in, you don't have to improve at all. You can be just sustaining what you did. There's no requirements for continual improvement.
And I think, I mean, this is happening in the organic sector as well, but for the quorum sense guys, for the regenerative guys, that, you know, when extension services were cut, they turned around and walked into the nearest farmlands and bought the chemicals that were the substitute for the changing knowledge. This is my impression anyway. And then what they've found now is through Facebook, through you know, different social media groups, they're able to share knowledge, because it's always been about knowledge and information, and that was turned off at the tap in the 80s and 90s, and now it's turned back on again, but through a completely different mechanism, and that's kind of really cool.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, New Zealand farmers have become reliant on the sales rep as their extension agent. Of course, the sales rep is completely conflicted, because they are trying off and on bonuses and stuff to sell farmers products, chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. So the whole system is completely I was searching for the word, just a total disaster, I think, you know, in terms of trying to get good information out to farmers. So exactly, Jody, the social media has been true transformation, allowing farmers over very vast differences of like minds to be able to communicate and support each other. And the livestock, as touched on before, Regen came out of the American Midwest of low density livestock and cropping systems, and therefore having livestock, if you are going to be a regenerative farmer, to me, livestock are a critical part of that system. You know, cropping only systems, a regen, I think that's really, we're talking kind of more agroecological type approaches.
Yes, and a lot of the people that see that the world should only be vegetarian forget that there's a lot of land that can't be cropped. It can't, you know, you can't put a carrot crop on it, you can't put a cereal crop on it. And, you know, there is plenty of evidence showing, you know, particularly small frame farm animals can really assist, you know, the entire life cycle of managing that soil, but also helping humans, you know, thrive and eat well. It's quite important to understand that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is a quite critical thing, because if you're just in cropping, the science is absolutely clear that cropping systems to date have been diabolical for soil health, loss of soil organic matter, organic carbon, all these kinds of aspects. I suspect there's a number of really quite significant improvements we could use with ecological techniques, particularly increasing plant diversity, intercropping, this kind of stuff. Agroforestry is another great example of kind of highly diverse intercropping. But I do question how much we can gain by improving our cropping systems versus having a mixed farming system where there is a pasture phase and livestock on it, and how irreplaceable that is for improving soil organic matter and soil health, soil carbon, organic carbon again. So to me, there's some really significant challenges and open questions in this area. And partly is, again, how you frame them. I'm just thinking, article in the paper today in New Zealand talking about wallabies that are a pest down in central near Waimate, central Canterbury. The marsupials have a completely digestive system to the ruminants. They don't produce methane like sheep and cows do. Should we be farming marsupials rather than sheep and cows for meat? Quite possibly. That have a far less of an impact, climate impact, than the ruminants would.
Well, and so, as an Australian, I don't actually have a problem with an introduced species that is sitting at pest levels. I would be happy to have wallaby pie, Merf.
There'll be a few people that are saying, "Oh, those introduced sheep, they're a pest." The New Zealand field maggot, as the infamous Bob Crowder once described the things. So yeah, everything virtually in New Zealand farming systems are exotic. We don't farm any natives at all. Everything is exotic. So the wallabies are just another exotic. Why don't we farm those? So a different perspective on regen, and it's like organics and agroecology. All these farming systems are like big multifaceted jewels. They're not simple things to explain. You cannot write a definition, even though we have these things in organics that explain them. You have to have been inside the tent for 5 or 10 years to truly understand these systems and what they're about, what the values, the philosophies, the practices are all about, to truly understand them. So as part of the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge, a number of papers were written around regenerative agriculture. And I specifically say around because they weren't actually doing research on regen itself, but there was one paper that specifically went out and did some social science around regen. This was the cartoon we used inside the overarching white paper for the thing. So this is clearly putting the situation in context as far as the authors were concerned. This is one of the key diagrams from the paper. I'm not going to go through all of this because there's an awful lot of it. So it talks about living complex ecosystems, integrated circular systems. Farms are ecosystems. Ecosystems are complex adaptive systems. This is a very specific term from system science. intensive agriculture manages farms as linear production lines, just as from a factory. You have inputs, you have seed and fertilizer and machinery and energy and irrigation. Soil is treated essentially as just an inert medium into which to grow the crop, and the crop comes out the other end, or the livestock. Regen aims to manage farms as the complex adaptive systems they are. And so part of that is the regenerative mindset. I'll also note up the top, Kaitiakitanga, a number of Maori researchers working on the white papers said, kind of interesting, there's quite a lot of similarity between the regenerative mindset and worldview and Te Ao Maori. And this is kind of being explored further post the end of this project. But Kaitiakitanga, that vision of you are essentially of a placeholder to look after the environment, the kind of flip side of the Eurocentric view that the man has dominion over nature. So it's interesting.
Kaitiakitanga is related to stewardship and care. Yep. So it's a principle.
And to me, that's an interesting thing, the fact that this is principles and values driven. Same with organics. Organics is one of the few farming systems that has explicitly defined its value system and its ethical principles and foundations. So the one bit of actual science that was done a part of this project was a social study looking at the key things that people consider to be part of regenerative agriculture. So we went out and we did workshops and focus groups and surveys and all those kinds of things. This is a large sample size, 1,600 odd people, which, considering the number of people in Regen, is more like a census than a survey. But the thing that really I missed and came out on this, the social well-being. So many people think of regenerative agriculture as a bunch of agronomic practices. It's not. It's a social network. It's a social. I'm struggling for the words here. It's a social grouping of like-minded farmers helping and supporting each other, as you talked about earlier, Jodie, on these social networks.
And it's the concept of quorum. I really love that they call themselves quorum sense, because once you get a group together like that, it's not instrumental, it's not linear. You know, you build upon this and this knowledge, and it's networked knowledge, which is very sociological, and how you look at it is quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. And while Quorum Sense is a legal entity, has a chair and a committee and stuff, Quorum Sense as a social network really does not have a head. Anybody can stand up and say, this is what I think, or this is what I'm doing, or I've got a problem. What do other people think? Can I have some help, please? You know, what advice is out there for me? So to me, it's really a highly democratic system as well. So next came out, completely unsurprisingly to me, was the soil stuff, because of the soil health being the kind of the key focused around Regen. Then we kind of started diversifying. We got the circular system stuff, but then access to markets. So the Regen guys are not kind of going, oh yeah, we don't care about profit. They're very focused on profit, I can assure you. They're focused on profit by actually farming smarter, by as they say, spending less money in town, which means spending less money on agricultural inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides, etc., and using smarter farming techniques, ecological farming techniques, to make their farm more efficient, as well as resilient and robust. We've got profitability in there, the mindset, the biodiversity comes through, and the water, big concern about the impact of farming on water quality in rivers and streams and lakes, etc. And then we have this mindset. This is probably the key thing that differentiates regenerative farming from its precursor biological farming. The mindset and attitude stuff comes in here. And some of this stuff can kind of feel a bit trite almost, or self-obvious, but it's one of those things you kind of had to have been involved in this for a while to kind of learn actually how much stuff is under some of these things, you know, like question everything. Well, question everything. What does that mean? You know, so often in farming, we're doing stuff because that's what we did last year and the year before that, or worse, the parents did it, or even worse, the great-grandparents did it. That's literally the answer when you ask some people in farming, why are you doing this? The great-grandfather did it. So yeah. Question everything. Why are we doing this stuff?
Well, that's really interesting because the people I know that were the biological farmers, they were questioning everything, but they didn't actually have, it wasn't weaponized through social media communications. So for the biological farmers, they might have been individually curious, but it was harder to, they might have had newsletters and shared a percentage of information, but it's scaled up, at a grand scale now with social media, and that's where people can be really curious and challenge each other in a really kind of dense way.
To me, this is kind of one of the key changes and one of the great ironies in this space. Considering how toxic social media can be, the great irony here is social media has been an immense power for good in allowing farmers that have become disconnected due to the depopulation of rural New Zealand and the inability to get pissed at the pub and drive home and other issues like that, which is clearly not good. It has allowed them over space and time to reconnect and rebuild those social networks. And when you have a social network in the democratic, that highly democratic environment we just talked about, these kinds of moral norms, these value systems are able to evolve. And to me, if I was a social scientist, I would be diving headlong into this stuff and really starting to pick out what is happening in this space. Because to me, this is a really interesting and really important new dynamic in New Zealand farming systems, the role of social media to allow like-minded farmers to provide these mutually supporting and value generating social systems to emerge.
You look, and they do talk about controversial issues because of because of course, glyphosate, where court cases have now paid out billions and billions of dollars to the victims of glyphosate poisoning, who are ordinarily sprayers and farmers, is controversial because there's a lot of money behind it. And of course, as we've discussed, there are a lot more herbicides that are a lot more toxic than glyphosate. But the question is, how do you wean yourself off it? How do you go? How forgiving are you of the farmer that is in your discussion thread that hates glyphosate? And it's really important to be in a place where we can have those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So actually, just touching on a number of points we just made. So a couple of years ago, at least now, when Regen was just taking off, so it could even be 3 years, MPI, Ministry for Primary Industries, called a hui in Wellington, trying to get their heads around all of this. And to me, one of the fascinating things was it felt just like an organic hui. All this complicated stuff around philosophy and values and stuff bouncing around. And to me, the kind of the thing that spoke louder than any words is when the meeting decided they didn't like what MPI asked the meeting to do and told them to get knotted. And MPI was trying to get its mouth shut and some breathing going on, because it was a bit shocked because nobody had ever done that to MPI before. We had an open mic session which kind of just randomly kind of walked around the room and everybody had their say. And the discussion circled and circled and circled and closer and closer and closer. In the end, the meeting concluded that the most important thing were values. And to me, this is really important. There's a really interesting book I recently read by Robert Zimdahl, Agriculture's Ethical Horizons. His principal argument in this, and it's in his 3rd edition, so he's been arguing for a while about this now, mainstream intensive agriculture has never even realized that it is based on a value system. Agriculture is fundamentally not a scientific activity. It is an ethical, a political, and a values-based activity. And so much of the time, people that are challenging organics or regenerative and stuff are trying to do so in a scientific space. They're calling them unscientific. The late great Sir Paul Callaghan actually called organic agriculture unscientific. But in the words of the truly great Wolfgang Pauli, it's not even wrong. It's fundamentally a category area. You're trying to debate values and political systems within a scientific framework. They're incompatible. They're completely different realms of human knowledge and understanding. So to me, that the Regen guys even then said values are the foundation of everything. Get the values right and everything else flows from them, speaks me absolute volumes. And as we touched on earlier, organics, along with permaculture, are the only two agricultural systems that are formally identified and enunciated their value systems. And in the case of organics here, their values are health, ecology, fairness, and care. And I would reiterate the point, unless you've been inside the tent for 5 to 10 years, that is completely meaningless. To anybody in organics, that absolutely speaks bookloads to them.
Yes, and the trick is, and this is what PSGR talk about a lot, when you have a lot of information coming at you, when you're at sort of the interface of biology and technology, or inputs or emissions, it's going to be a high information kind of environment. And so what that comes down to is how you navigate through that is through judgment. And your judgment needs to have an overarching sort of principles, you know, to guide that judgment. And that's why it's so important, because you for every farmer in every region, every microclimate, you know, every different agricultural sort of area of expertise, it's different, it's nuanced. So that's why judgment's really important.
And for people that are kind of struggling to get their heads around this stuff, because this is philosophy, and a lot of people in this space are probably not well boned up on philosophy of ethics and stuff. If you're a physicist, it doesn't matter whether you're screaming left or right wing, that has no impact on your physics. And I'm talking physics as a pure science rather than engineering, which is applied physics. You know, if you're conservative or left wing, it has no impact on what you think of the second law of thermodynamics or the standard model of quantum mechanics. If you move into chemistry, your politics do not have any impact on whether you think combining these two molecules will produce a third molecule. But the application of chemistry and the pure chemistry are much closer together. And depending on your politics, you may be asking, is this the kind of chemistry I wish to create? Wish is not a scientific concept. Then you move into the realm of biology. The fact that you're interested in biology, or particularly the next one along, ecology, your politics is quite possibly driving you to study those areas. And clearly what you study and how you study, particularly in ecology, is highly likely to be determined by your politics. So understanding, for me, one of the probably the biggest errors in intensive agriculture is misunderstanding the relationship of values and ethics and science in the whole area of intensive agriculture. Indeed, I think this is one of humanity's greatest errors, is not understanding this relationship.
Well, the problem, one of the problems I see is, you know, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, our science systems became innovation systems. And if you look at the OECD, the OECD defines innovation as development of a product, a process, or good or service. So our science system became applied, they became instrumental. And so the complex drivers of human health and human disease, and the drivers of soil decline, erosion, you know, water quality, became sidelined because it didn't fit within the innovation and excellence frameworks. And that was a catastrophic paradigm change that took a lot of science away and didn't leave a place where scientists that actually wanted to look at interdisciplinary, complex, uncertain, nebulous, you know, biology and environmental connections and associations. It left them largely underfunded or unfunded.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, right, pulling this all together. So I'm seeing out there, and I'm talking to people who are saying exactly the same thing. Something has shifted in the last couple of years. It really feels like we're at this tipping point, and this example of both the UN and the EU now fully boots and all into agroecology. I'm kind of going, those are two massive supranational organizations, huge amount of information required, and endless debate to make a decision. So if they make a decision on something, it's with a vast amount of reason and knowledge and information behind them. So I see regen just as a symptom of this. It's surfing the wave just at the right time. It may disappear completely, and we may have something else replace it. Or we may actually start realizing in New Zealand that agroecology is the future of farming, and that organics and regen and intercropping and agroforestry and permaculture and all these other things are increasingly brought into the fold, and all the lessons they have and the experience they've got are brought to bear on mainstream farming to transform this. One of my arguments has been in organics is it's got two routes to world domination. Either it takes over mainstream farming, or mainstream farming morphs into organic agriculture. After 30 years of first thinking about this kind of stuff, it's very clear what's happening. Organics is not taking over the world. Mainstream farming is morphing into organic agriculture and agroecology. Faster in places like Europe, much slower in places like New Zealand, but New Zealand is definitely on that path. And I can only see this speeding up. The global environmental challenges, the planetary boundaries we are transgressing, we are not making good progress on this. Agriculture is the heart of virtually all the planetary boundaries, the key driver of all of them. So if we want to reduce our impact on the planetary boundaries, we have to transform agriculture. Tinkering at the edges isn't going to make the difference. So to me, this is all about the transformation of agriculture. And what have I probably said? So yeah, and what does this mean for organics in particular? I think unless it transforms radically and actually seizes organics version 3.0 and writes a new set of standards, it's just going to be subsumed into mainstream farming. It's going to take some time. Organics is a massive juggernaut, particularly in terms of marketing and consumer awareness. But as mainstream farming moves ever faster into the agroecological space, it's just going to be subsumed. Thank you very much.
Merf, thank you for that. That was great. And one of the questions I would sort of like to discuss, to talk about just before we finish, is the idea for a lot of city people. You know, we see the Dutch farmers, we see the issues of fertilizer all of a sudden becoming really expensive. And what we don't see are governments stepping in to say, right, okay, we need to just hyperdrive information in order to help transition farming systems, and we need those feedback loops. So we need to put a lot of money into the science farmer information continuum if we are to make that shift, because farmers can't change tomorrow. No. And if we look at them as being a social good, because when farmers aren't using a bunch of herbicides, they're not going into the water, they're not lodging in the sediment, they're not going into drinking water. And so how, you know, that it's that idea that if people are, you know, a lot of people are cross or angry with farmers, but it's driving this pressure on governments to prioritize this more complex basic science for agriculture, and not say, well, you know, we put 30 mil towards it, that's quite enough, but we're happy to put 200 mil towards biotechnology. It's underinvestment in basic knowledge is one of the tragedies that we're seeing.
I'll go even more fundamental than that. Both as an ex-farmer and an agricultural scientist, everything that has been done in intensive agriculture since the Second World War has been at the behest of the public and politicians. People said, the public and politicians said, we want more food. John Key, going back to the 1990s, said, guys, we want you to produce more commodities to farmers so we can increase our balance of exports. So what farming has been done is not because farmers necessarily wanted to do this stuff themselves. Indeed, going back to the 50s and the 60s, many farmers were really quite aghast at what was being asked of them. But eventually the political, the public pressure, the funding systems, the science system, all the rest of it kept pushing farmers and growers to intensify. So the intensification of agriculture is not because that's what farmers and growers wanted. That's because the public and the politicians asked them to. So that old cliche, when you point your finger at somebody, remember 3 fingers are pointing back at you. If you want to fix farming and growing, you need to say, we want a farming system that is sustainable, that can be sustained for thousands of years and can provide the kind of nutritious food that we need to live healthy lives, rather than a food system that is creating massive health problems such as obesity and diseases of wealth. So to me, it's kind of not just the farming. Farming is only one half of agriculture. The production side is one half. Consumption is the other half of agriculture. Everybody that eats is involved in agriculture. And so if you do not like what happens in agriculture, you need to change the way you eat and the way you vote. That will change agriculture.
Yeah, and I think we've got to be really cognizant of, you know, and Raj Patel has talked about this as well, the monopolization, the monopoly capitalism that is the agglomeration of the seed industries, the pesticide industries, and the distributor networks. And, you know, so we've got the idea that, you know, you've got these massive global auction systems that then shape and can be shaped by the industry itself to alter prices. So I think, you know, we've got these big influences, and these influences are into media as well, that are saying, well, we have to all shift to, you know, be vegetarian and only eat soybeans, and we don't want to talk about the complexity of diet that is essential for both us and the planet. And it's helping shift that in such a way that we actually support scientists. And one of the other things is that I think people are really challenged by is organics is a line in the sand. So when you walk into a shop, you know, that is a line in the sand. And so we know that, you know, cereal crops, pulses, lentils, you know, they're using glyphosate to dry down the crop. So the residues of Roundup glyphosate are higher. So I really respect the fact that organics has a really important place, because it's that line in the sand. But the challenge for science is, how do we shift to sort of lift everyone and help farmers transition away from that chemical addiction?
Yep, absolutely.
Merf, thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Indeed, my pleasure too. All the best, Jodie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Bye.